Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and what a pleasure I have to be sitting with a journalist with a most impressive background in covering Israeli affairs and politics for many years. He served as correspondent at the Knesset for IBA News, and currently he's executive producer of Voice of Israel, the English language online news source in Israel, and he hosts his own weekly series, National Security. It's a pleasure to welcome Dan Diker to L'Chaim. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here at L'Chaim with you, Mark.
And what's very special for me, and all of you should know, Dan and I will be partnering as JBS and Voice of Israel. We'll be doing many programs together, and we'll be actually bringing you some of what Voice of Israel does. And I'm very excited about it, including a series that you're putting together for us live at 5, which you do in Israel. But anyway, thank you for joining us. I want to give you a chance for just one moment. Talk about what Voice of Israel is and why it's making a unique contribution on the Israeli scene.
Well, thanks for that question, Mark, because in fact, I've been involved for 25 years in Israeli media, politics, diplomacy, and so on, and I don't remember a time of being so enthusiastic about an Israeli-sourced talk radio is what it is,
yes,
called Voice of Israel. Now, Voice of Israel, funny enough, it's an irony, but it is the brainchild of two gentlemen, one of whom, Glenn Ladow, who moved to Israel as what they call an Oleh Chadash, a new immigrant, some 8 years ago. And Glenn felt, as a lover of Israel, a lover of Zion, that there wasn't a news source from an Israeli point of view in good English in order to broadcast to the world. And you know, the world, as you know, and you were frankly one of the pioneers of this notion of global broadcasting in a conventional broadcast sense. But now we have a social media-driven world. And I think Glenn Ladow recognized that A, people were willing to pay subscriptions for highly niched content, number one. And number two, people are interested all over the world, the Arab world no less than the West, in hearing good news and talk and analysis from Israel in well-spoken, well-crafted English from an Israeli point of view on the region as well as on Israel. And Israel, of course, is a multicultural society with, you know, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze, Circassians. We've got you know, Ethiopian folks. We've got folks from all over the world. And I think that Glenn, and then later his co-founder and co-director Aaron Leibovich, who lives in Florida and does the marketing from Florida, they realized that they could reveal this extraordinary surprise to the called Israel that people didn't know about. And that's how Voice of Israel emerged. And I believe that Voice of Israel can make a very important contribution to the international, deeper and more correct, nuanced understanding of what Israel is all about.
Well, I'm thrilled to be partnering with you, and you know, I met with you and Aaron, and I think what you're doing is fabulous, and I'm thrilled that you have agreed to put let me show some of your stuff. Basically, it's like what you'd see on American television every now and then. There's a television simulcast of a radio program. In the morning, you can see all kinds of talk shows that are being broadcast on radio, and then there are sports shows being broadcast on radio that are being shown on television. We're going to be doing the same thing with Voice of Israel, so that's thrilling. Who do you think your audience is in Israel itself?
There are some 350,000 English speakers, Anglos, people from the United Kingdom, the United States and Canada, and New Zealand and South Africa.
Yes.
And there has been a lack of a really cogent, well-crafted, well-produced English language programming that goes on for 8 hours. And remember, this is 8 hours a day of fresh programming on a loop, so you can get it 24/7. But you just dial into voiceofisrael.com, and you're constantly getting fresh content.
Fabulous.
As a matter of fact, just as a one point, we have a new program Besides the fact that I think national security, if I might just plug.
Sure.
I think national security is a program that I am honored with producing and also delivering, many times with my colleague Bassem Eid, a Palestinian-Israeli who offers really a unique and other perspective, but the interchange is very profound and very honest and open, as you have here on JBS. You have opinions from all sides, and that's what we endeavor to promote and to broadcast as well. Having said that, we are very positive about Israel. We criticize Israel when it need be criticized, but we're very positive in the sense that we believe certainly that Israel is a thriving democracy, a free country with a very serious security challenge. And so, we try to reveal that in the fairest way possible. On national security, we deal in a very apolitical way with all of Israel's security challenges and the security challenges of the whole region.
Fabulous,
so we're putting
right.
things into context, which I think is very important. And what we do for those 350,000 English speakers is give them an address in Israel.
A lot of the media sources in Israel are very much identified with either the left or the right. And Aretz Sheva is on the right, and Haaretz is on the left. Where is Voice of Israel?
Well, Voice of Israel, I would say, first of all, it does not have a political line.
Right.
It defines itself as patriotic and fair. I think if you were to take a combination of the Times of Israel, this wonderful service that is spearheaded by David Horowitz, the former editor of the Jerusalem Post, and you were to take what they call Israel Hayom, or Israel Today, which is the Sheldon Adelson paper, and a little bit of Aretz here and there, and a little bit of, I wouldn't say Arutz Sheva, but I would say a little bit of the Jerusalem Post, and shake them in a cholent pot, I think you would get something called Voice of Israel.
Okay. You have Yishai Fleischer.
We do.
That's Arutz Sheva.
It's formerly Arutz Sheva. There are a couple of people who are sort of alumni, if you will, refugees of Arutz Sheva.
But you do cover the spectrum.
We do, and I think that there is something called fair and balanced. I mean, fair in the sense that we've had the scholar Peter Beinhard on frequently on Yishai Fleischer, and we've had people from all over the political map, and we have observant and non-observant show hosts and topics covered. We have very unusual show hosts like Rabbi Muttel Wolf, who takes a really humorous and very unusual take and offers an unusual take on Jewish themes that I think would be very attractive to people who come from the more liberal streams of Judaism, because even though he's an Orthodox rabbi, he is extremely open and very humorous and very engaging and very embracing. And I think that's the type of Weltanschauung, that's the type of worldview, it's the type of approach that we take. Every single Jew is, every woman, every man out there, and every human being clearly is a creation of God, and we believe that we should be reaching everyone and embracing everyone in this discussion.
Okay, and one of the reasons why I got so excited after we met was, in many, many ways, what you're trying to do with Voice of Israel is what we're trying to do with JBS, and the philosophy is very much the same. You're a natural. I could just ask you any question and it just comes pouring out of you in an articulate, intelligent way. And what's interesting is you were not by original training a journalist.
I was not.
For many years you're in America before you make Aliyah some 25 years ago, and you're really in investment banking, yes?
I was in investment banking, but I will reveal a secret here on JBS that I actually did not speak with your dear colleague and a wonderful professional, Ron Jacobsohn, who's works here for you with the station, that I actually was trained at the Stella Adler School of Theater. And Stella, blessed memory, who is, he was of the Zion family, Adler family of the Yiddish theater.
Yes.
And I'm sure you may well have interviewed.
Well, I've interviewed members. I never got to interview her, but not Stella. I was on stage with Bruce Adler, by the way.
Oh boy!
For one glorious night in a Broadway musical called Crazy for You. But the Adlers are an extraordinary family, and Bruce was a lovely, lovely man. Sadly, he died much, much too young. But you studied with one of the giants of American theater.
Giants. The only modern actress or actor, as we say today, who is a teacher and studied with Stanislavski.
Yes.
She studied for 2.5 weeks with Stanislavski in the former Soviet Union.
So where were you born?
I was born in New York City.
And where'd you go to high school?
I went to the collegiate school for 12 years.
On 77th?
Correct,
Okay.
on 77th.
We were living at 78th and West End Avenue for a while.
So many of the seniors would actually be smoking cigarettes on your front entrance, much to the chagrin of parents as well as teachers.
Okay. And then you go to college where?
Went to Harvard College.
Okay. And then lo and behold, you end up studying with Stella Adler, because why?
I was studying with Stella Adler, feeling in the mid-1980s, many of my classmates were going to investment banking, going to wonderful companies like McKinsey & Company and Bain, a Boston company, consulting, making lots and lots of money. And I think this particular Jewish personality was looking for something greater. I was not an observant Jew at the time. My mother had become observant through studying with Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, who today is the chief rabbi of Efrat, and he was as we know, he was the great rabbinical figure at the Lincoln Square Synagogue on the Upper West Side until he made Aliyah. He immigrated to Israel himself in 1983. And so Judaism was exposed to us in a very open and convincing way through Rabbi Riskin and then Rabbi Saul Berman. We really had quite an exposure there. And
You were very lucky.
Very lucky.
You had fabulous teachers.
Very, very lucky. Very lucky. And as much as I was exposed to Rabbi Avi Weiss on the more activist, in the more activist strain, but he was extraordinary in the way he handled women's issues in Judaism, as Rabbi Riskin handled women's issues. Both of these men are pioneers in women's Judaism. I will say one thing: I live in Efrat in Gush Etzion, and today Efrat has a rebbitzin, has a young woman who is handling a lot of the rabbinical issues for women, and this has created some tensions with the official rabbinical establishment. But Rabbi Riskin is no stranger to those kinds of tensions, and I think this is where he is profoundly appreciated by the modern Orthodox camp in Israel.
So here you are developing a much stronger sense of Jewish identity with your mother in New York.
Correct.
And at the same time, you're studying theater because
Studying theater at night.
And you think maybe you want to be on stage?
I was on stage actually, and was lucky enough to be in some 10 or 12 movies, including Wall Street, including Rambo, including, I must have been the only Jewish guy that was in Rambo. Well, actually, Rambo 3 was done in Israel in 1987. People don't know, but it was supposed to have been in Afghanistan. And to show you how far we've come, the Rambo 3 picture, of which I had a small part in the beginning, was we were supposed to have been supplying Stinger missiles to what were then called the Afghani Patriots. Those people today are called Al-Qaeda.
Interesting.
And there you have it, how far we've come.
I want to get this straight. You have speaking roles in American movies?
Yes, absolutely. If you go online, I kind of wanted to do this, Mark, just to be able to tell my grandchildren that their grandfather tried something, tried something. I will tell you this: I still get $14 every 3 months, and that pays part of my parking bill in the middle of Jerusalem. But I still do. I get it. Can you imagine? And this is going back 30 years.
So how do you go to making Aliyah?
Well, this is a very important question, because it seems simple on the one hand, that people have the Alex Haley type of roots experience, and they want to get closer to their roots. I had the great honor of being involved with the Israel Tennis Centers Association. I was a highly nationally ranked tennis player as a junior. And my mother, Val, had been deeply involved with something called the Israel Tennis Centers, which is an extraordinary social project that uses tennis as a vehicle to bring Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis and other Israelis together to help them. I wouldn't call it a coexistence program, but a co-empowerment program through tennis. And they also improved the Davis Cup team. It's been an extraordinary project. I joined that project and coached the children, and realized that Israel is not only for Israelis. Israel is the national home of the Jewish people, and that going to Temple Emmanuel twice a year on Fifth Avenue for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah was not the be-all and end-all of anyone's Jewish identity. But in fact, the idea that Israel, as the national home of the Jewish people, that had a language and that had a 5,000-year history and a 3,000-year national history, and you know, where there are Jews of every possible color and every possible denomination from 100 countries around the world, I said to myself, wow, that's identity. That's identity. And Natan Sharansky wrote a book called on identity, and he talked about that. Defending Identity was the name of the book. And I felt, having been in Israel for the first time in 1979 as a coach at the Israel Tennis Centers, and then again in 83 and 84 and 87, that
Same thing, tennis?
tennis and interviewing. It was the first, actually, in 1987, I was a student at Harvard College of the great Robert Coles, the child psychiatrist who's written some 70 or 80 books about children. And I had been his research assistant in Israel in 1987 for his book called The Religious Life of Children.
How does that happen?
Well, that was part of Harvard. That was part of the Harvard experience as an undergraduate.
Okay.
And several years later, he went on a MacArthur Fellowship. I took him to Israel, and we interviewed. You can get his book called The Religious Life of Children, where there's a whole section on Israel. That experience had a profound influence on me as a Jew, as I found that to be a Jew in the world is to be able to speak Hebrew, to be able to understand what it meant to be part of the Jewish adventure in history, being part of the Jewish people in Zion, where it all began. And that put Temple Emmanuel on Fifth Avenue in greater context.
Were you that Temple Emmanuel twice a year Jew?
I was.
And that was your mother as well?
And grandmother and grandparents.
You haven't mentioned your father.
Yeah, well, my father grew up in a more conservative, traditionally conservative, Chuck.
Chuck?
Yeah, more conservative, traditionally conservative environment in Brooklyn, and then also educated at Harvard and Harvard Business School, and went into the world of finance. Very active in Israel, by the way. He was the president of the Friends of the Israel Museum when Teddy Kollek, of blessed memory, started up that great project, which today, you know, the Israel Museum today is one of the great museums of the world under the very able direction of Mr. Snyder, James Snyder, who is one of the great curators of the greatest museums in the world. Mm-hmm. And they started together. I remember Moshe Dayan of coming to New York with that eye patch and speaking on behalf of the museum. And Teddy, and that was the first, 1974, that was the first exposure. So there was this sense, Mark, that Israel, especially in those years, we had just as a people survived this onslaught in 1973 by the Egyptians, by the Syrians, and we had barely escaped with Israel by the skin of our teeth. And there was a very emotional rebound by American Jews at that time in doing everything they could to help Israel get back on its feet after that, you know, nearly ignominious defeat by the Egyptians and the Syrians. And I remember as a young 13-year-old being part of that excitement of helping to rehabilitate and strengthen and bolster the Jewish state. So I think that's where it came from.
And over a period of years, you fall in love with Israel.
Absolutely. Fall in deep love with Israel. I mean, it's a romantic love. It's a love of between a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. And I see Israel in a way as a woman. I mean, Israel in a very way is a, on the one hand, it looks to many Americans and to many people around the world as this, this ultra powerful, and it is a great power, but it's a very vulnerable country. It's a country that has great sensitivity. It's a country that values life, as much as any, if not more than any other country I've ever seen, including the United States. And you just see the way it behaves. Towards people, certainly in times of national emergency and crisis. It comes together in extraordinary ways.
Mm-hmm. You're married. You have 5 children?
Married, yes, and 5 children. 2 children that I fortunately inherited when they were very, very young, and raised them, Maor and Dvir, and then 3 children my wife and I had together, who are 18, 2 daughters, 18, Ariel 18, Talia 17, and Michael 14.
Mazal tov.
14.
Where did you meet your wife?
We met at a Friday night dinner in Efrat.
So she was in Israel when you met her?
She was. She's an Israeli, very Israeli.
She's Sabra?
She's a Sabra, and her parents came from Iraq and Iran, respectively.
Sephardic?
Sephardic.
Fascinating.
Sephardic.
As a strange question, and I've never asked it this way before, she was open to you, an Ashkenazic American Jew?
That's a very good question. In fact, very much so. Very much so. Because she herself is an unusual young lady of Sephardi background in that she was interested in going way beyond her own background and being exposed and in relationship with people, and her parents as well. By the way, her parents are deeply religious Jews, but very open.
You feel close to them.
Very, very much so. Very much so. And in fact, the problem with marrying into a Sephardi family is that when you decide to marry a Sephardi family, you actually gain 20 pounds. And then once you're in, every 5 years, you possibly go up. So you're in big trouble if you marry a Sephardi family, because Friday night meals are not,
Who was the Mesader Kiddushin, the rabbi at your wedding?
The Mesader Kiddushin at our wedding was Rabbi Menachem Schrader, who was my Rebbe, my Gemara Rebbe, who taught me Talmud in the Or Torah Stone institution, which is Rabbi Riskin. And Rabbi Riskin, of course, was a sort of a co-officiator at the wedding. And Rabbi Riskin, whom I love very, very much, and I actually serve on the board of Or Torah Stone today, he's actually my next-door neighbor. He lives exactly next to me in Efrat.
And you make Aliyah in 1990, is it?
1990.
1990. You get married in?
Yeah. The truth is, if I might just mention how the Aliyah happened.
Yes.
It was a moment of a type of Columbia, Harvard type of revolt in the 60s, translated into the context of 1990. What do I mean? I was in my first year at Harvard Business School when the rockets started falling on Israel from Iraq. Scud missiles, actually, that Saddam Hussein was sending over as a gift of his radical Islamic ilk. And I felt that the only way that I could respond from where I was by making Aliyah. So I actually went to the head of the admissions, a lady by the name of Laura Fisher, and I asked her if I could take the rest of the year off and come back because I had to do something important. I didn't tell her what it was. And I went to the Aliyah office in New York at the Jewish Agency on East 59th Street, and I told him that I wanted to make Aliyah. And he hesitated, and he looked at me because the rockets were falling, and he said, "Why the hell would you want to do something as stupid as that?" And I said, "Well, because that's Aliyah is what Jews are supposed to do, isn't it?" He goes, "Yeah, but there are rockets falling on the airport." I said, "Well, all the better, let's get going." I got all the papers processed in a matter of days, and I was off to Israel, landed at Ben Gurion on February the 8th, 1990. I was handed a gas mask in one hand and what they called the Tehudah Zehut, the identity card, in the other. And so began the saga, the last 25 years.
Wow. Dan, that's just a delicious story. When did you become fluent in Hebrew?
That, I think a lot of American Jews believe that if you just go to Israel within 2 years, you'll be just rapping in colloquial Hebrew. Actually, where you actually become better is speaking English with an Israeli accent. That you can get fast. But it has taken me the better of 15 years to really become fluent, and I married into an Israeli family. So American Jews, or Anglo Jews, become fluent in 3 ways. They go to the army, and you can become very fluent very quickly by going to the army as a youth, or you marry into an Israeli family. What you do not do is marry an Anglo woman and live in a place like Ra'anana or Efrat, because you speak no more Hebrew after 20 years than you do before.
Interesting. Did you ever serve in the IDF?
I did not. They did not want me. They didn't need me. When I immigrated to Israel in 1990 at the age of 20, almost 28, there were thousands, tens of thousands of Ethiopians who came just months after I did, and there were Russian young men and women who came at the same time. So they didn't need an old man at the age of 27 and 11 months because they had lots and lots and lots of young men and women to fulfill those roles. And so therefore, I was never called up.
Okay. And then you find your way into journalism in Israel.
So that was it. In the mid-90s, I went to yeshiva for 3 years, I must say, to learn the tradition, to learn the Talmud, to learn the Mishnah and the Gemara.
Okay, what prompted you to do that?
Well, Rabbi Riskin said, if you want to be an educated Jew, you have to study, and you have to understand what the conversation is. And a matter of fact, Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory, whom I had met in the 80s and who had really prevailed upon me to start learning, and also Rabbi Tzvi Marks is a brilliant Talmudist and a rabbi today in Holland. They worked very closely together, and both of them, I became very close with both of them, and they prevailed upon me to learn philosophy and to learn Jewish philosophy. And I think it was through Jewish philosophy, through the exchange of ideas, that one came to the more traditional learning of Judaism and the what they call the halakha, the Mishnah, Gemara, halakha, the whole rabbinical tradition, in addition to learning what they say Chumash and Rashi, to get a sense of the parameters of what this enterprise called Judaism is all about. It's so complicated, Mark, as you and I know, and I think that between Rabbi Hartman and Rabbi Riskin and some of the others in America that I had been exposed to, it gave a great overall picture, and Israel was the glue that bound everything together.
Well, I want to say this for a second time. You were very, very lucky. And you mentioned these iconic names, these figures who have, well, they tend to be associated with something called modern orthodoxy. And there are throughout the Jewish world, in almost every community, extraordinary teachers, extraordinary rabbis and scholars who are doing fabulous work educating Jews. But you're now talking about the Shlomo Riskins and the Avi Weisses and the David Hartmans and the Yitz Greenbergs, and all of them have been able to touch many of those who were not initially brought up in a very Orthodox or halakhic community, and have been able to teach American Jewry and then really Jewry around the world a love of the Jewish tradition, which is what we're talking about here, a love of the Jewish tradition, and what I call the Jewish embrace of life. And you are a magnificent example of someone who's been influenced in wonderful, wonderful ways. So your story, and I didn't know your story, but the story you've told at this table is really, in some way, we would love it to be a model for Jews who are intelligent, bright, sensitive individuals who were not born into necessarily a very traditionally oriented world. And even if they are, there are ways in which you can learn and be open, and the learning is just exhilarating. And lucky you experienced this, and you made choices. I say to everyone, luck is something that comes along, but the real credit given to someone is when a door is open, do you walk through the door? Or do you, stand back? It looks to me like you walked through every door that was possibly open to you that brought you closer to the state of Israel, the Jewish people, and the Jewish tradition.
Well, thank you for putting it that way. I mean, I think I tried to walk through doors that appeared to be welcoming and others frightening, but in other words, it was very clear. And I think David Hartman was very much, was lucky enough to spend many hours with him. And his approach of Judaism, halakhic Judaism, as the halakha is the last step. He wanted the ideas out there. He wanted to fight the battle of ideas with Aristotle and Socrates and the Rambam, Maimonides and Nachmanides, and therefore be in the marketplace of ideas from a Jewish point of view. When we go to school, Mark, we learn Latin, we learn Greek, and we learn, we learn the contributions of the great philosophers, but we don't learn the Rambam. We don't learn Maimonides. And David Hartman's position was always, well, Maimonides should be in conversation to Jews and non-Jews alike, because he's such a giant of Jewish thought and contribute to Western thought, mysticism. And that turned me on very much, is to be in competition, to be in engagement in competition, and in dialogue is a better word, with these other traditions. And then out of that, because the Rambam, who wrote Yad HaZakah, who wrote the great Talmudic work where he reduced the Talmud to very understandable principles and organized them by subject.
Code of Jewish law.
The Code of Jewish Law. And therefore, that was much easier to understand what that meant, because it came out of the philosophical tradition. And as I approached it from that was Rabbi Hartman's approach. So that made it very, I think it was a very American-friendly approach, because this is such a great country, because it encourages people through the notion of liberty to explore what they want to explore without any government interference. In fact, the government protects your right here. Now, in Israel, in contrast to that, there is such almost sometimes a vicious debate in the public square about, who's right and who's wrong and what kind of Judaism is authentic and what is inauthentic, it places a tremendous amount of pressure on people who are trying to feel their way, from perhaps one stream of Judaism to another. And I think I will say now, and much to the credit of someone by the name of Naftali Bennett, who in Western circles has been branded as a hawk and someone who is uncompromising. But in fact, and I know him quite well, when it comes down to Judaism, he is one of the most open-minded, reformed thinkers that Israel has ever known in the public sphere. And I think he's really threatened the rabbinical establishment because he wants to make Judaism in Israel opening and welcoming and engaging, as many people feel in the United States, where there is no public pressure or the context of the intensity of the public discussion. So I think I'm very hopeful when I see people like him who have been engaged in religious affairs in Israel. And I think it's a great, I'm very optimistic about Israel.
It is exciting to hear the way you describe it. And again, you may or may not know this, but the audience should certainly know this, that the people you have described are the people that are seen all the time on JBS. And
that's delightful.
We have Shlomo Riskin giving a Devar Torah every Friday. Avi Weiss is about to come on. David Hartman, he always be remembered for good. I had this extraordinary meeting with him on L'chaim, and we show it every Shavuot. And Yitz Greenberg is again in that same mold. And what you have is a non-fundamentalist but totally committed type of open orthodoxy, which is the word that's being used now more than modern. And you were exposed to that. And one of the things that's interesting is Israel at the moment seems to be captive to a much more fundamentalist Orthodox establishment, the chief rabbinate. And some of the friction and tension in terms of Judaism in the state of Israel is because the chief rabbinate has political power for very specific political reasons given the coalition government type system that Israel has, the parliamentary system, but that the Judaism that the chief rabbinate represents is not a Judaism that speaks to the vast, vast majority of the Israeli people, even those who are Orthodox in Israel. We have, Izzy Liebler comes on here all the time, and Izzy Liebler is a committed Orthodox Jew who thinks the chief rabbinate should be disbanded. So that's the tension that you now, as an Israeli, even though you're an American Jew who's made Aliyah, and you now study at a yeshiva in Israel, you become totally committed, you're a traditional Jew at the same time, but you are not a fundamentalist, and all of the teachers you have spoken about are not fundamentalist in their approach.
Well, actually, I do feel like I'm fundamentalist. I mean, I'm fundamentalist in the sense that I love Judaism. I mean,
But that's not what fundamentalist means.
Right. I'm not fundamentalist in the sense that, not exclusionary. I'm not fundamentalist in the sense that when we use the word fundamentalist, sometimes
fundamentalist is often a word for literalist.
Or literalist.
In the Jewish tradition, the rabbinic tradition, if there's one thing we learn, the Jewish tradition is not literalist. That's what Hartman says.
Right.
And that's what, by the way, that's coming out of Soloveitchik.
Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim.
Exactly right.
These and these are the words of the living God.
Right. And the genius of the Jewish tradition is the Midrash. And the Midrash is the imagination, the fancy, and the living with tension that most fundamentalist religious traditions, be it Jewish or not Jewish, just don't experience.
I subscribe to Rabbi Soloveitchik's understanding, which is he was the Rebbe of Rev Hartman, of Rev Riskin,
of all of them,
of everyone, and the greatness of battling with ideas and battling with the tensions inherent in Judaism. And it was, I don't speak any Yiddish, and my grandfather spoke Yiddish, blessed memory. He came out of Vilna, and he used to say, "This is schwer zu sein a Yid." It's very difficult to be a Jew.
It's hard to be a Jew.
It's hard to be a Jew. So what's the shot? What's the understanding of it's hard to be a Jew? Because it's hard to be a Jew because we're always living in tension. You can never relax. And Rabbi Soloveitchik said, we're supposed to be that way. And this is extraordinary. It's not that we're condemned. In a way, in a way, when he talks in halachic men, he talks about, in a way, I don't like to use the verb condemn, but that is our mission, is to handle that tension all the time.
Absolutely. But that's such an important insight. You know, the Jew does not denigrate doubt. You are permitted to doubt and struggle. Yisrael, the whole idea that we struggle with man, with God, with life, and that the challenge of life is to behave in a certain way, even when philosophically we are still struggling to find answers for ourselves. So I love the way you say it, and I could spend this entire hour doing nothing but talking Judaism with you, but I want to turn now. Talk to me for one moment about Benjamin Netanyahu. There seems to be almost a degree of schizophrenia among Israelis. I very often speak to Israelis who are no fans of Netanyahu. At the same time, they vote for him. They vote Likud. And, you know, he won 30 seats in the last election, which in terms of Israeli politics is a large number in the 120-seat Knesset. And he is now going to be prime minister for longer than any other prime minister, including David Ben-Gurion. And yet at the same time, he is respected and yet not beloved. I want your sense of where you think overall the Israeli people are in their feeling for, estimation of, assessment of Benjamin Netanyahu.
The Israeli public, Netanyahu by many is a man you love to hate and hate to love, and by many, I mean I'm just analyzing here. Netanyahu has an acute sense of what Israel needs to do to protect itself, and he has been consistent on that point for years. He wrote books on terrorism, fighting terrorism, counterterrorism, back in 1992 and 93, before anyone was really thinking about radical Islamic terrorism. He addressed that issue to a joint session of Congress in 1996, and people were saying, "What are you talking about? Iran is not a global security threat," and he's on record as saying it is. And I think Israelis believe his security sense. He's also, Mr. Netanyahu, and I know I sound like I'm coming out of the Prime Minister's office on this, but I must, say as an analyst, as someone who's followed him, as someone who knows him, I've never worked for him, but has followed him carefully and studied him. He has become a very practical prime minister. Who would have thought, by the way, and I'm speaking here as someone who is looking at how the Israeli public looks at him, that he would have gotten up in 2009 at Bar Ilan University and said, I will accept the notion of a Palestinian state, a demilitarized Palestinian state, because I want my neighbors to live in dignity. Who would have thought that Mr. Netanyahu or any Likud prime minister would have made that statement? Now, we know that Mr. Sharon made a very, very major step in pulling out of Gaza unilaterally, even though Israel was then blamed for that concession because we didn't time it, or we didn't, we didn't dialogue enough with the Palestinian Authority, which is absolute nonsense. They would never have been able to hold off in Gaza. But nonetheless, Mr. Netanyahu has balanced Israel's need for security sense with a diplomatic approach that is quite flexible. I mean, let's bear in mind that Mr. Netanyahu had accepted the Palestinian state. What he said during election period, which is being overplayed in this country for political reasons, is that there would most probably not be a Palestinian state in this particular term. And anyone who has eyes in his head and looks at the region would not say anything different. And I would argue that Mr. Herzog, Bougie Herzog, who's the head of the opposition, who's a Rabbinist security hawk, would say exactly the same thing. And I think that there has been a very unfortunate politicization of Israel's true security context in this country that I think that people ought reconsider when they talk about Mr. Netanyahu. The Israelis have reconsidered it, and that's why they voted for Mr. Netanyahu, because they are highly concerned about security today, with ISIS running, ISIS beheading children. And Israel, Mr. Netanyahu and Bogi Ya'alon, Israel's current Minister of Defense, have developed something called Israel's Red Line Security Policy. And that means that Israel maintains very consistent security red lines. Netanyahu has been very clear on those red lines. According to foreign sources, Syria has been attacked in major counterterror operations 8 times in the last 2 years, and Israel has not been counterattacked by the Syrians, and no one like the Syrians knows that Israel means business. That's what the Middle East understands. Middle Eastern countries don't talk, they do. And Israel has become a doer when it comes to counterterrorism. The Arab nations the Arab nations respect people who exercise power in their own defense. And that's what Israel has done under Mr. Netanyahu very effectively. Anyone who's lived in Israel in a day-to-day basis really understands that there is a profound security threat against Israelis. And it's not a political position, it is simply a reality. And all the more so over the last 25 years. You know, in the first years of the 1990s and extended into the 2000s, the prevailing view and belief, even in Israel, was that if you could solve the Palestinian issue, which at that time went from being a terror problem to a diplomatic problem, you would then begin to engender peace all throughout the Middle East. Today, it has been totally inverted, and Israelis, like no other people, understand that. There is a lag among a lot of American Jews for political reasons, because they disagree with the public perception of perhaps Mr. Netanyahu is perceived as being very hawkish. And because of that political dislike of a particular approach or a particular personality, they discount American Jews, the very real, strategic, all-encompassing security threat that Israel faces on all borders. And I think that this is the major shift and the major difference between Israelis living in America and Americans living here, is that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is probably the most stable situation that the Middle East knows today. Because Israel looks north, they see 120,000 rockets coming from Iranian-sponsored Hezbollah. They look to the south and they see 20,000 rockets coming from Iranian-sponsored Hamas. They look to the east and they see the Islamic Jihad, which is part of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They see the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, which is an Iranian-sponsored militia. They see the Fatah Tanzim of the Fatah. These are all serious threats against Israel. Now we have ISIS, and now we have Al-Qaeda. I mean, my goodness gracious, that is the major threat, not only against Israel, but against the larger Middle East. And today, what Israelis understand, I think, here, and why I'm here in the United States speaking to this issue, is that Israel has actually become a protector to many of its Sunni neighbors that in years past, as you and I know, had been the sources of hatred against Israel, and first and foremost, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the state of Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, have become close allies, secret and quiet as it is, against this shared threat of the Islamic Republic of Iran, primarily, and also ISIS and Al-Qaeda, even though Al-Qaeda has roots in Saudi Arabia. It all seems to make very little sense. But one thing is absolutely clear. Israelis understand that Israel is in a very serious security situation today. And Americans, I believe, in hearing the way they handle some of the diplomatic discussions, and I'm talking about people like Jeremy Ben-Ami or people like Peter Beinart, who have followings, who are serious intellectuals, and I think that they are terribly mistaken on what the state of Israel's national security reality really is. And I think in many cases, public figures such as they do a disservice by underplaying the very real existential security threats that Israel is playing in the middle of this Middle East cauldron today. Mm-hmm. And those in this country and other countries who publicly criticize Mr. Netanyahu are really publicly delegitimizing the democratic process in Israel. And I would urge elected leaders in this country and others to respect the choice that the Israeli people have made, because people who are not traditional right-wing voters voted for Mr. Netanyahu. And again, Mark, it goes back to this notion of the profound security. The vast majority of security assaults against Israel are never reported here because they're prevented. And CNN only reports when a number of people are killed, and that already has passed the mark where there have been scores of terror attacks that have been prevented. And Israelis are aware of the prevention because they are reported in the Israeli media. They are not reported in the American media. Mm-hmm. And therein lies a difference in knowledge and in understanding.
And what would Israelis say to me now about their feelings about President Obama?
President Obama has not been an overwhelming favorite of the Israeli public. his numbers were quite a bit higher after he came in the kiss and makeup session that he and Mr. Netanyahu had about a year ago, as a matter of fact. When President Obama came to what was called Binyanei Ha'omaz, our convention center, in a personally chosen audience that the White House chose, they did refuse to speak in the Knesset, which I have a deep concern about. But nonetheless, his numbers went up, his popularity went up. He is perceived as not, certainly politically, not acting in Israel's security interest. And there are a lot of examples of that. I mean, I think that there's a deep concern among the political class and the class of the intellectual class that by recognizing unilaterally a Palestinian state on the 67 lines, Mr. Obama has actually violated an agreement, which is called the Oslo Agreement, that that the United States was a witness, bore witness to that very agreement that was first exchanged as a letter in 1993 and then confirmed in 1995 through the Oslo Interim Agreement, that the United States, as a witness to that agreement, the agreement said that Israel and the Palestinians would have to resolve all differences through direct negotiations only. And by the United States now giving that short shrift and cutting that off at the knees, they are essentially playing into the Palestinian strategy of using diplomatic, political, economic, and legal measures to attack, to delegitimize, to demonize, and to isolate Israel. This is a terrible assault. And the United States the United States is actually playing a role in advancing that assault. And this is something that most people don't know because they don't know the facts. Israelis know it, and they're not happy about it. Mm-hmm. They're not happy about it. It is true that that President Obama has helped to maintain the security relationship on the broadest level, but Israelis are very suspect about the whole Iranian diplomatic deal because, from their point of view, Iran every single day says they're going to destroy the Jewish state. Every single day in Farsi. They say it every single day. The Hezbollah, their prison mistresses up under Nasrallah, up in Lebanon, they say it every single day. The Hamas says it every single day. Do you believe them, Mark? I do. I believe when the enemies of Israel say they're going to destroy Israel. I mean, Hamas has tried to do it 3 different times. Now by kidnapping 3 young teens, 15 and 16-year-old teens, murdering them, and then launching the third Gaza war. I mean, and Israelis live that. And I think that's where they're unpleasantly, impressed by Mr. Obama's approach, because I don't think they understand. I don't think that they believe when he says, "I've got your back." Mm-hmm. I don't think they believe it because he hasn't shown it on the ground. Mm-hmm. And I say this with the greatest respect to the office of the presidency of the United States and the Israeli-American relationship, which is rock solid. The American people, both houses of Congress, there is an ironclad relationship between these two peoples, from a Judeo-Christian standpoint to a mutual interest standpoint. We're just now talking about this particular White House has been, in the minds of many Israelis, particularly unfair diplomatically to Israel.
You live in Efrat.
Live in Gush Etzion in the city of Efrat.
How many people live in Efrat?
11,000.
11,000. It is on the West Bank. It's called a settlement, a city of 11,000. There are those who say the settlements are the obstacle to peace and that they never should have been done. They are in some way illegal or immoral. What's your view of the settlements, not only in Gush, which are in the ring around Jerusalem, but Ariel and throughout the West Bank? Do you feel that Israel has made a serious mistake by continuing the settlement policy? And what do you think Israelis feel right now?
I think the greatest regret that I have, Mark, is that the vast majority of people that say settlements are the greatest obstacle to peace have absolutely no idea what they're talking about factually. That's the first problem. I have very little problem with a person taking a position saying that they oppose many settlements. And one of the first facts that of which people are totally unaware is that over the last, over the last 6 years since Mr. Netanyahu, and I know what I'm saying, I'm not making an error here, since Mr. Netanyahu's been prime minister, Israel has adopted a policy of reversal of settlements. In other words, Israel has focused its settlement activity around what's called as the Green Line. And that started actually, when did that start? In 2004, when Prime Minister Sharon received a presidential letter commitment from George W. Bush. And in the letter commitment, which was based on Israel's unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, that the United States would support, and this is a presidential letter commitment from George W. Bush, what's called defensible borders for Israel. And defensible borders from Israel was always an idea that was espoused by the Labor Party. In 1967, it was General Yigal Allon, who was the pre-state Palmach commander. He was the commander of Yitzhak Rabin. And he said that in any final status agreement, Israel would annex parts of the West Bank, of Judea and Samaria, that were strategically vital to its existence. And you know what that Yigal Allon was talking about? He was talking about Kiryat Arba. Now, if you talk today about Kiryat Arba,
right outside Hebron.
Right outside Hebron. If you talk about a place like that, you're talking about someone to the right of Bennett. So the entire political context has moved profoundly to the left, and Mr. Netanyahu has limited all construction in accordance with the agreement with the United States. He has limited all construction in existing settlement blocks, which is totally consistent with the presidential letter of 2004. Now, many people watching this program will go, well, what letter was that? The Obama administration doesn't recognize that letter. Well, therein lies a major diplomatic problem, because the United States generally does not throw out presidential letter commitments that was overwhelmingly approved by both houses of Congress, including former Senator Clinton, who voted in favor of the Bush letter, that would allow Israel to continue building in existing settlement blocks close to the Green Line, and not in isolated settlements, to make way for a possible compromise deal. Well, Mr. Netanyahu factually has been not only true to that idea, but he has, in a de facto way, stopped settlement building in Jerusalem, or building in Jerusalem. No one in Israel considers Jerusalem a settlement. No one, from the left to the right. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. There is nobody in the mainstream of the center left to the center right that considers Jerusalem a settlement. But if you listen to the language coming out of this particular White House, coming out of the media, they talk about illegally occupied territories in Jerusalem. Well, there is a total, complete disconnect between Israel as a body politic and the United States if people are talking about Jerusalem as a settlement. It was never the policy of the United States, ever, under any administration, including the Carter administration, to consider Jerusalem a settlement. And that's where we are today, and Israelis reject that. They reject it out of hand. And I think that American Jews have got to understand, Mr. Netanyahu, his particular prime ministership notwithstanding, that Jerusalem is embraced and considered by a vast majority of Israelis to be as mainstream as Tel Aviv, Yaffo, even though Yaffo was occupied in 1948 and annexed to Israel. And those who are accusing Israel of building an Efrat should call for the return of Jaffa, which they wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. A vast number of American Jews are watching you right now, and many non-Jews also. So I want you to just speak to America for a moment. What do you wish Americans and American Jews understood better about Israel, where Israel is today, who the Israeli people are? If you had to take a moment, just what is it you wish we knew better? And I just want you to talk to them.
As an American Israeli who loves the United States, who grew up in the United States, was educated at some of the greatest institutions of higher learning and of the liberal tradition, the intellectual and ethical tradition of this country, one of the greatest hopes that I have is that people would come to Israel and understand the profound multiculturalism, liberalism, and an openness of Israel as a Jewish state with several minorities inside it, but the relationship between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Circassians, and minority groups such as Ethiopians, even though there are difficulties, and those who have witnessed the difficulties of the Ethiopian community this past week, as we all have, and were highly pained by it. That, by the way, had become the biggest story for days and days on end of the Israeli media, of the political class, of the public, of the radio stations. And this is a very positive and vibrant type of example, because the Israelis, as Mark Golub said, are living with questions, are constantly questioning themselves. And as somebody who was brought up in a multicultural environment in the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is really, in a sense, the bastion of American liberalism and engagement of the greatness of this country and all of the minorities, all of the people, the immigrants that make this country up. This is what the Israeli experience really is. It is not the way many in some of the major networks portray it. It is not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It is a country that is much more highly engaged with itself and the outside world, and much more sensitive to all of the social issues that go on, and is constantly struggling. And I invite all of you, come to Israel, spend 2 weeks there, experience what I'm telling you on together with Mark Golub, experience it yourself, and I truly believe that you may be profoundly influenced as I have been for the last 25 years. So I invite you, and I invite you to come to our home for Shabbat. I invite you to come out in Jerusalem and see this thriving international city, and in addition to Tel Aviv, one of the great cities of the world, and experience Israel, as I think you may be very pleasantly surprised.
You're out of this world.
Thank you so much.
Of this world. I love you so much.
Thank you
From the
so much.
first moment we were together, I knew you were somebody very, very special.
Right.
You are making a spectacular contribution to Jewish life, the Israeli scene with Voice of Israel. I wish you kol tuva hatzlacha in all you do.
Todah.
When I'm in Israel, I expect to be at your Shabbat table
Absolutely.
in Efrat, and I hope you sit at this table very,
Please.
very much. I just scratched the surface with you.
I would be delighted to come back.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Shalom. Dan Diker, the executive producer of Voice of Israel. He hosts his own weekly show, National Security. You will see Dan and many of those on Voice of Israel right here on JBS. And what a fabulous person he is. I invite any of you to share any of your own thoughts or comments to the conversation Dan and I have had. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, Facebook me, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.